The year is 1985, September. A young woman named Dr. Eris Thorne stands in a laboratory. The air smells of sterilized glass and ozone. She holds a single sheet of paper, a soil analysis report. She reads the numbers again. Nitrogen, 8.2. Phosphorus, 4.1. Potassium, 6.9. Organic matter, 14%. 14%. It was impossible. She knew the soil type for this quadrant, Tipton sand loam. They called it sugar sand for a reason. It couldn't hold nutrients. It couldn't hold water. A good farm on Tipton loam might hit 3% organic matter after decades of careful amendment. This number was a fantasy, a ghost in the machine, a typo. She picked up the phone. Her hand was steady, but her mind was racing. Dr. Alistair Finch answered on the second ring, head of the agronomy department for 30 years, a man who had forgotten more about soil than she would ever know. She explained the situation, the sample number, the impossible readings. "I think the lab made a mistake, Alistair, a sampling error." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight. Then Finch's voice came back, quiet, reverent. "What's the farm name on that report, Eris?" She glanced at the top of the page. Galloway Farms, Section 14. Finch let out a slow breath, a sound like air leaking from an old tire. "No," he said. "That's no mistake. That's Arthur's dirt." And with that, a story 30 years in the making began to unspool. A story about a piece of land everyone said was worthless, and the man who refused to believe them. This is the kind of story we tell on this channel. Stories of quiet persistence, of forgotten history, of people who looked at an impossible situation and found a way. If you believe these stories need to be told, if you believe in the power of the long game, subscribe to this channel. Join us. Because what happened on that worthless piece of land changed everything. Let me tell you about Arthur Galloway. Our story begins not in 1985, but in March of 1955. Arthur Galloway was 24 years old. He was lean and quiet, with hands that looked like they were carved from oak. He had just come home, not from a war, but from a hospital, a farming accident, a PTO shaft. It had taken his left arm just below the elbow. His father had died a year before that, a weak heart, leaving Arthur with his mother, the farmhouse, and 40 acres. 40 acres of the worst land in the county, Section 14. The boneyard, his father had called it. A patch of glacial outwash, mostly sand and rock. It grew pine trees and poverty grass. Nothing more. The Galloways had never really farmed it. They sharecropped richer land 3 miles south. But the owner of that land had sold it. The new owner had his own tenants, so Arthur was left with the boneyard and an idea. An idea so simple it sounded like madness. He was going to farm it. He needed a loan. Not a big one. Just enough for seed. Some pipe for irrigation. Maybe a used walk-behind tiller. Something he could manage with one arm. The bank manager was a decent man. He knew the Galloway family. He shook his head sadly. "Art," he said, "I can't lend you a dime against that land. It has no collateral value. But if you can get the county agent to sign off on your plan, to say it's viable, I might be able to find a way." So Arthur Galloway went to see the county agent. His name was Frank Miller. Frank was a pillar of the community, deacon at the church, coached Little League for 20 years. He had been the county extension agent since the Great Depression. He was a good man, a kind man, and he was absolutely certain about some things. One of those things was soil. Frank Miller believed in soil maps the way a preacher believes in scripture. He saw Arthur come into his office, saw the pinned-up sleeve on his left side, felt a wave of genuine compassion. He listened patiently as Arthur laid out his plan, a small-scale, intensive market garden. Fast-growing crops, greens, radishes, carrots, things he could sell at the farmer's market in the city. He talked about a new way to irrigate, a way to build the soil over time. Frank listened. He nodded. He never once interrupted. When Arthur was finished, Frank leaned back in his creaky wooden chair. He steepled his fingers. He looked at Arthur with kind, sad eyes. "Son," he began. His voice was gentle, fatherly. "I've known your family my whole life. I knew your grandfather. I respected your father. And I want to help you." He pulled a large, rolled-up map from a cabinet. He spread it across his desk. It was a soil survey map of the county, dated 1938. He tapped a pale yellow section with his finger. Section 14. Right here. Tipton Sand Loam. He looked up at Arthur. "Do you know how many people have tried to make a go of that land? The Dinsmores in the 20s. They went broke. The Millers, no relation, during the war. They lasted 2 years. It won't hold water, son. The nutrients leach right through it. It's like trying to farm a sieve." Arthur was quiet. He just watched the man's face. Frank continued. He genuinely believed he was saving this young man from a lifetime of failure. He felt it was his duty. "My job," he said, "is to help farmers succeed. And that means telling them the hard truths. Your plan is clever. It is. But you can't change the fundamental nature of the dirt. God made it that way. And I'm not going to be the man who signs a piece of paper that lets you take a bank loan and throw your life and your mother's security away on a piece of worthless ground. I won't do it. It wouldn't be right." Frank felt he was being protective. He felt he was being responsible. He was a good man doing what he thought was right. Certainty, not cruelty, was his guide. And that is the most dangerous limitation there is. The one imposed by someone who genuinely believes they are protecting you. It cannot be fought with anger. It can only be disproven with decades of work. Arthur Galloway stood up. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He just looked at Frank Miller, and he said 2 words. "I see." Then he turned and walked out of the office, leaving the kindest man in the county sitting alone, with his maps and his certainty. Arthur drove the old Ford pickup home. The silence in the cab was louder than the engine's rattle. He didn't feel anger, not yet. He felt a cold, quiet hollowness, the feeling of a door being gently but firmly closed in your face, by someone who is smiling while they do it. He pulled into the yard of the old farmhouse. His grandfather was sitting on the porch swing, an old man with eyes the color of a faded sky. He had seen Arthur drive away that morning. He saw him return. He didn't need to ask what happened. He could read it in the set of his grandson's shoulders. Arthur sat down on the top step of the porch. He stared out at the 40 acres of pine and scrub, the boneyard. He told his grandfather everything, what Frank Miller had said, the maps, the history of failure, the word worthless. When he was done, the old man was quiet for a long time. The swing creaked back and forth, a slow, rhythmic heartbeat. Finally, he stopped the swing with one worn-out boot. He looked at Arthur. His gaze was clear, unyielding. He said, "Frank Miller is a good man. He knows his maps. He knows what the government taught him about dirt. But he doesn't know this dirt. He doesn't know our dirt." The old man leaned forward. His voice dropped to a near whisper. "They took your arm. They took your father. They took the land we used to farm. They took everything from us, boy. Everything except the dirt. He pointed a trembling finger toward the field. And that dirt is enough. The phrase hung in the air. The dirt is enough. It was not a hope. It was a statement of fact, a creed, a foundation on which a life could be built, or rebuilt. Arthur looked from his grandfather's eyes to the field, and back again. Something settled inside him. The hollowness was replaced by something hard, something solid, a quiet resolve. He stood up. He walked to the old barn. He didn't have a bank loan. He didn't have the county's approval. He didn't have 2 good arms. But he had 40 acres of worthless land, and the echo of his grandfather's words. The dirt is enough. And so the work began. Let me tell you about that first year. He sold his father's car, a 1951 Chevrolet Style Line Deluxe. It was the only thing of value they had left. He got $350 for it, cash. He took that money to the scrapyard. He didn't buy new pipe. He bought rusted, discarded lengths of steel conduit. He bought a used welding torch. He spent a week teaching himself to weld one-handed, clamping the pieces with his knees and his feet. The welds were ugly, but they were strong. He didn't buy a new tiller. He found the rusted frame of an old Gravely Model L. The engine was seized. The tines were broken. He paid $10 for it. He spent the next month rebuilding it on the barn floor. He used parts from his father's old lawnmower. He hand-filed new tines from a piece of a leaf spring he found on the side of the road. He got the engine to turn over. It smoked and coughed, but it ran. His grandfather showed him the spot, a small depression at the far corner of the property, overgrown with cattails. The old man took a willow branch. He walked in slow circles. The branch dipped. "Right here," he said. "This is where the water is close." Arthur dug the well by hand. A post-hole digger and a shovel. It took him 2 weeks. He hit water at 12 feet, clean and cold. He hooked up a small pitcher pump he'd salvaged. He laid his hand-welded pipes. He didn't irrigate the way Frank Miller would have taught him. No overhead sprinklers. That would be a waste on this sandy soil. He drilled tiny holes in the pipes. Drip irrigation, a concept that wouldn't become popular for another 20 years. He was inventing it out of necessity. He didn't plow the whole 40 acres. He plowed one, just one. He didn't have the money for lime to raise the pH, so he gathered wood ash from his mother's stove. He spread it by the bucketful. He didn't have money for fertilizer, so he made compost. Every leaf, every kitchen scrap, every blade of grass from the yard. He hauled manure from a neighbor's dairy farm. The neighbor was happy to get rid of it. Arthur built his soil one wheelbarrow at a time. By May of 1955, he had a single acre ready. 1 acre divided into 10 long beds. He planted radishes, cherry bells, a 28-day crop. He planted spinach, Bloomsdale longstanding, a 40-day crop. He planted lettuce, Black Seed Simpson, a 45-day crop. He worked from sunup to sundown. His left arm ached where it ended. His right arm burned with the strain, but he never stopped. The community watched. Of course they watched. A rural community is a fishbowl. Most thought he was a fool, a sad case. They'd see him out there in the heat, wrestling that old tiller, hauling buckets of water. They'd shake their heads. "Poor kid," they'd say over coffee at the diner. "He just can't accept what that land is. Shame what happened to him. And to his daddy." Some were less kind. They called his farm Art's Folly, or the One-Armed Patch. They laughed, not out of malice, but out of the deep-seated fear of anyone who breaks the established pattern. His failure would confirm their own wisdom. His success would challenge everything they knew to be true. But there were others, a few. One was a man named Earl Peterson, an old farmer who lived down the road. Earl had seen the Great Depression. He had seen families lose everything. He respected work. He respected grit. One afternoon, he drove his tractor over to Arthur's fence line. Arthur was on his knees, pulling weeds. Earl watched him for a few minutes. Then he shut off his tractor and walked over. He didn't offer pity. He didn't offer advice. He held out a rusty 5-gallon bucket. It was full of fish heads and guts from his fishing trip that morning. "The boy needs nitrogen," he said to Arthur. "Bury these between the rows. The old way." Arthur just nodded. "Thank you, Earl." Earl grunted. "Don't thank me. Just prove 'em all wrong." Then he walked back to his tractor and drove away. He never mentioned it again. But every week, a bucket of fish guts would appear by the fence post. A silent offering. A vote of confidence in a currency more valuable than money. Have you ever been told you couldn't do something? By a teacher, a boss, a friend, a parent? By someone who thought they were protecting you from disappointment? Someone whose certainty felt like a cage. How did that feel? And what did you do next? Let us know in the comments below. Because what Arthur Galloway did next wasn't just for himself. It was for everyone who had ever been told no. By late June, he had his first harvest. Radishes, crates of them, perfectly round, crisp, and red. He loaded them into the old pickup, drove the 60 miles to the city. He sold out in 2 hours. He came home with $80, cash. He used it to buy more seed and gasoline for the tiller. 2 weeks later, the spinach came in. Another trip, another $120, cash. Then the lettuce. He started a second planting as soon as the first was harvested. Radishes out, beans in. Lettuce out, beets in. He was pulling 3 distinct harvests from the same bed, in a single season. His soil was so alive, so rich with the compost and the ash and the fish guts, that the plants grew with a speed and vitality the neighbors had never seen. His 1 acre was outproducing their 10. He worked this way for 3 years, quietly, methodically, building his soil, building his savings. He didn't buy a new car. He didn't fix up the house. Every spare dollar went back into the land. More pipe, more compost, more seed. By 1958, he had saved up $2,000. The 20-acre plot next to his came up for sale. It was more of the same, more Tipton sand loam, more boneyard. The owner was asking $100 an acre. Arthur went to see him. He laid $2,000 in cash on the man's kitchen table. The man signed the deed without a second thought, happy to be rid of the worthless land. Arthur now owned 60 acres, and the quiet expansion began. Let me tell you about the next 20 years. The pattern was set. Work, harvest, sell, save, buy. 1960. Arthur cleared another 5 acres, put it into his intensive system. He hired his first employee, a local boy who everyone else said was too slow to work. Arthur taught him the system. The boy thrived. Net profit that year, $8,000. Frank Miller drove by the farm sometimes. In his county-issued Chevrolet, he'd slow down, look at the impossible green, the neat rows, the busyness. He never stopped. He just shook his head and drove on, a man wrestling with a crack in his own certainty. 1965. Arthur owned 120 acres, all of it bought with cash. No loans, no debt, no asking for permission. He had 15 acres in intensive vegetable production. He had a contract to supply 3 of the biggest restaurants in the city. He built a greenhouse, a simple hoop house made from salvaged pipe and plastic sheeting. Now he could grow through the winter. 4 harvests a year from that section. His soil organic matter on the original acre tested at 7%. The local university started hearing whispers about the one-armed farmer in the North County, the one growing prize-winning carrots in pure sand. They dismissed it as folklore. 1970, Arthur bought the 80 acres across the road, cash. He now owned 200 acres free and clear. He had 10 employees. Most of them were people the rest of the world had written off. Men with injuries, men who were too old, men who were too young. He didn't care. He cared about work. He paid them well, and he gave them a share of the profits. His farm was becoming an ecosystem of plants and of people. The name Art's Folly had long since disappeared. Now, people just called it the Galloway Place. They said his name with a different tone. Awe, resentment, confusion. How was he doing it? The contrast math was undeniable. A conventional farmer in the county might gross $200 an acre on corn. After costs, they might clear $50 if the weather was good. Arthur Galloway was clearing $2,000 an acre, sometimes more, on land the soil map said was worthless. He was a living, breathing refutation of the accepted wisdom, and that made some people deeply uncomfortable. 1975. Arthur Galloway was 44 years old. He was no longer just a farmer. He was an innovator. He designed and built his own equipment. A one-handed seeder, a mechanical harvester for root vegetables. He never patented any of it. When other farmers asked, he gave them the plans for free. He started experimenting with cover crops, hairy vetch and rye, planting them in the fall to hold the soil, to build it even further. He was practicing regenerative agriculture before the term even existed. He wasn't learning it from a book, he was learning it from the dirt. His grandfather had passed away years ago, but his words were still the bedrock of the entire operation. The dirt is enough. Frank Miller was retired by now. He lived in a small house in town. He read about Arthur in the local paper sometimes. Galloway Farms expands again. Local farmer wins statewide produce award. Every article was a quiet testament to his own failure of imagination, a testament to the limits of his kindness, the weight of his certainty. He was a good man who had given bad advice for the best of reasons, and he had to live with the silent, growing, green evidence of just how wrong he had been. This is where the story becomes about more than just one man. This is where it becomes about a community and a reckoning. The year was 1977. It was the year of the Great Drought. The rain stopped in May, and it did not start again. By July, the cornfields in the county were a disaster. Brown, withered stalks. The soybeans were stunted and yellow. The ponds dried up. The wells started to go dry. Farmers who had been working the land for generations were facing ruin. They gathered at the diner, their faces etched with worry. They talked in low, desperate tones, about loans, about bankruptcy. But in the north of the county, Section 14, the Galloway Place was an oasis. It was green, lush, vibrant. Arthur's well, dug by hand where his grandfather had shown him, had not failed. It was tapped into a deeper aquifer the official maps didn't show. His soil, now rich with more than a decade of compost and organic matter, held water like a sponge. While his neighbor's sandy loam was cracked and dry just hours after a rare sprinkle, Arthur's land was still moist inches below the surface. His crops were not just surviving, they were thriving. He was still pulling harvests. Trucks still rolled out of his driveway, laden with produce for the city. The contrast was stark, it was brutal, and it could no longer be ignored. One hot afternoon in August, a pickup truck pulled into Arthur's lane. An old, familiar Chevrolet. Frank Miller got out. He was 75 years old now. His shoulders were stooped. His face was a roadmap of worry. Not for himself, but for the community he had served his whole life. Arthur was working near the barn. He saw Frank get out of the truck. He stopped what he was doing. He waited. Frank walked slowly toward him. He didn't look at the fields. It was as if he couldn't bear to. He stopped a few feet from Arthur. He took off his hat. He held it in his hands. He looked at the ground. "Art," he said. His voice was raspy. "I was wrong." The words came out quiet, but they landed with the force of a thunderclap. 22 years of certainty, washed away in a single sentence. He looked up, and his eyes were wet. "I was so sure I was doing the right thing. For you. I thought I was protecting you." Arthur said nothing. He just stood there, a quiet witness to a man's long overdue confession. Frank continued. "The farmers are losing everything, Art. Everything. The bank is going to call their notes. They're going to be wiped out. My neighbors. Your neighbors." He finally looked at Arthur. His gaze was pleading. "They don't know what to do, and I don't either. But you do. You figured it out. On this worthless piece of ground, you figured it all out." He took a shaky breath. "Will you teach us? Will you help us?" There it was. The moment of quiet devastation. The reckoning. Arthur could have said anything. He could have reminded Frank of his words. He could have listed his own decades of struggle. He could have gloated. He could have had his revenge. But Arthur Galloway was not built that way. He looked at the old man, this kind man who had tried to put him in a cage of protection, and he felt something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't forgiveness. It was something bigger. It was understanding. He nodded, slowly. He said, "The dirt was always enough, Frank. You just had to ask it the right questions. Let's go talk to the neighbors." And so began the next chapter, the legacy. Arthur didn't just help, he organized. He used his savings not to buy more land for himself, but to create a cooperative, the North County Growers Co-op. He guaranteed the loans for 5 of his neighbors, allowing them to buy the equipment they needed to convert to his system. He held workshops in his barn every Saturday. He taught them about compost, about cover crops, about drip irrigation, about intensive planting. He gave away 20 years of hard-won knowledge for free. Some were skeptical, too proud to take lessons from the one-armed man they had once mocked. They went under. Their farms were sold off. But others came. They listened, they learned, and they survived. Slowly, over the next decade, the agriculture in that part of the county began to change. The fields became greener. The soil became darker. The farms became smaller, but more profitable. Young people who had left for the city started to come back. They saw a future in farming that wasn't about getting bigger, but about getting better. The Galloway method, they started calling it. In 1985, when Dr. Eris Thorne made her impossible discovery in the lab, she wasn't just finding a data anomaly, she was uncovering a revolution. The university launched a 20-year study of Galloway farms. They wrote dozens of papers on his soil-building techniques. They proved, with science, what Arthur's grandfather knew from wisdom, that you could, in fact, change the fundamental nature of the dirt. Arthur never paid much attention to the academics. He was too busy working. He set up a scholarship fund for local kids who wanted to study agriculture, with one condition. They had to work on his farm for a summer, to learn with their hands first, to understand the dirt before they understood the data. Today, if you visit that part of the county, you will not find vast monoculture fields of corn and soy. You will find a patchwork of small, thriving farms, growing over 50 different kinds of vegetables, fruits, and flowers. You will find a farmer's market that is famous across the state. And in the center of the co-op's main office, hanging on the wall in a simple wooden frame, is a single, rusted piece of metal. It's a tiller tine, hand-filed from an old leaf spring. The first one Arthur ever made for his Gravely tiller, the physical artifact of a quiet rebellion. Arthur's granddaughter runs the co-op now, a young woman with a degree in agronomy and her great-grandfather's eyes. Sometimes, when the office is quiet, she'll walk over to the frame. She'll place her hand on the glass. She remembers Arthur, in his old age, touching that same piece of steel. He told her, "This is the tool that proved a good man wrong." And proving someone wrong who thinks they're being kind is the loneliest and most important fight there is. The story of Arthur Galloway is not just about farming. It's about a fundamental truth. The world is full of well-meaning people who will tell you what is and is not possible. They will show you maps. They will give you data. They will cite history. They will do it out of kindness, out of a genuine desire to protect you from failure. And their certainty can be the most suffocating prison ever built. Right now, somewhere in the world, a young person is being told their idea is foolish. An artist is being told their vision is unmarketable. An entrepreneur is being told their plan is impossible. By good people, kind people, certain people. Arthur Galloway's story is a reminder that the maps are not always the territory, that the conventional wisdom is only conventional, it is not truth, and that sometimes the most profound innovations, the most revolutionary changes, come from a quiet place of necessity, from one person standing on a worthless piece of ground, with nothing but their hands and a core belief that the dirt is enough. If this story meant something to you, subscribe to the channel for more like it. Leave a comment and tell us about a time you chose to believe in the dirt, despite what the map said. And share this story with one person who needs to be reminded that the kindest words can sometimes be the heaviest cage. And the most powerful act of freedom is the quiet, daily work of proving them wrong.